Hi there, everyone. Lisa Starr. We are here with this week's episode of the StarCast podcast, Everything Wellness Business Oriented. This week, we're venturing in a slightly new direction based on the fact that the wellness industry continues to expand beyond spa walls and into the way we live, work, and connect. Real estate has become one of its most powerful frontiers and one of the fastest growing segments of the numbers that we publish from the Global Wellness Institute. Wellness isn't just a service, it's being built into communities, neighborhoods, and everyday environments and shaping how people experience health, longevity, and belonging in a way that this is how people are choosing to live. So in this episode, we're going to explore the intersection of wellness and placemaking with Terry Slavic-Siuki. She is a leading voice in consumer insights, community design, and real estate strategy. And she brings a unique perspective grounded in sociology and storytelling on how developers can create places that truly resonate with the way people want to live today. In advance of the Global Wellness Summit's Wellness, Real Estate, and Community Symposium, which will be in New York City on May 12th, Terry will be speaking there along with a long list of wellness luminaries. Today, we'll dive into what this shift means for the business of wellness and why the future of our industry may be less about destinations and more about where we call home. So, Terry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here and it's fun to talk with you.
Thank you. So, your job, Terry, which is the storyteller and principal of TST Inc., you're also a published writer and the co-chair of the Wellness Communities and Real Estate Initiative for Global Wellness Summit. Your job is hard to describe, and I'd love to hear more, and I'm sure listeners would like to hear about how you got into this field, because from what I've seen from your LinkedIn, you started out after uni in marketing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I tell people that I'm really a sociologist, and I sit at the intersection of marketing and community development. So, after college, I'm originally from Vancouver, Canada, or that area. And so after college, I ended up working in educational television for a period of time and then transitioned into the ski resort business and went up and worked in Whistler Blackcomb, which was a riot. I could take ski breaks at lunch, for a year and a half. And
well, what were you doing there? Were you a ski instructor?
No, I was actually the director of marketing for Blackcomb.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And then I left Whistler and moved back to the city and started what I called kind of TST Inc. 1.0. And after that point, I was recruited by, at the time, the largest master plan developer in the United States, a company called Newland Communities, to come down to the U.S. and to take on the role as their chief marketing officer as they went through a significant acquisition and basically doubled in size. So my role as the CMO at Newland wasn't what you would traditionally call marketing, which is, people think of advertising and promotions.
Right.
Really, the core of my job was what we called community startup. And so whenever we bought a new piece of land, I would go out into the regions and work with our development teams and help answer two questions, which are sociological questions, Lisa. So who will live here and how do they want to live?
And you had this orientation from being a marketer. You have to think about who you're selling the product to.
That's correct. And so I worked at Newland as the CMO for a little over a decade. And then I left about 10 years ago now, actually, to launch what I fondly call TST Inc. 2.0. And so now I basically have taken all of the methodologies and expertise that we developed at Newland, and I work with large-scale master plan community creators across the U.S., Mexico, and sometimes in Canada to help them define place and create a vision for a community that, as you said, is driven by what people want. And your introduction, and of course the work you do with GWI as well, that is increasingly more and more focused on wellness and how do we create places and spaces that make people happier and healthier.
Brilliant. So you were with Newland for how long?
For just about almost 11 years.
11 years. And so when you started there, I'm suspecting that wellness was not a driver in the business model.
Well, back in the day in real estate, when we first started talking about anything related to wellness, it was, of course, out of the through the lens of green and sustainable design principles.
Right.
And we talked about spa and fitness as kind of being the precursor to wellness today in the real estate world. It was really the sustainability movement, environmentalism, best practices around material use, low impact development, wetland reclamation, those sorts.
Lead certification, things like that.
That came later, yes, but
Oh, okay.
one of the first developers to work with the USGBC and that team on developing frameworks for thinking about how we use resources better in creating large scale master plan developments, and then how we make sure that the things we put on the ground really made people's lives healthier.
So, how did it work being in such a large company? And this is sort of newish, right? That people are caring about how their home is built and the materials it's built with. How did they respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think Newland was one of the very first developers that really thought about people first. And our CEO at the time used to say, we're a marketing company first. We just happen to create communities. And we sold complete finished lots to home builders who then came in and built the homes. So we didn't construct the homes.
Okay.
And so our frame of reference, as I said, really was based upon whatever market in the country. And we had master plan developments in 14 different states. At one point in time, we had 28 different master plans that were all actively selling. And so, Seattle, Austin, outside of DC and Virginia, Minnesota, all the three markets in Texas, Portland, Oregon, markets in California, markets in Florida, all of those markets are very different. So we had to understand foundationally, what do people care about and how does the place we design and construct help them live better lives?
So, when did you notice this shift, like into from the materiality of where we live into more of the design elements?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, I just have a real passion for life and a curiosity about the little things. So, like, literally printed on the back of my business card is the phrase, how might we? And I think that real estate is just such an all-encompassing industry, right? So it impacts everything we do, and creating places where life is lived is just a really powerful and noble opportunity. So I take it very seriously. And, I think if I have to kind of define the purpose statement for Terry or for my business, for TST Inc., it's really to motivate creative people to see what I call the so what factor. Again, that sociologist in me, right? And to create spaces and places based on that so what factor that makes life better and the world better for all.
So, how did you come by this sociology mindset?
I think again, it just comes down to always being kind of curious about how people live and what motivates them, what excites them, what scares them. I think about pains and gains and, the Clayton Christensen's theory about solving problems for people or helping them amplify gains that they want to benefit from has just always been something that's important. I mean, I think that we place as consumers, we place value on things that matter to us. And in the business world, whether it's the wellness industry or marketing in general, or any asset class, if we don't understand what people care about, we're not going to connect with them in a meaningful way.
People are fascinating, honestly, to study. I mean, I could see that I would want to be a sociologist too. Just why we do the things we do is a mystery to me much of the time, but makes perfect sense to the people doing it.
Well, I think also, Lisa, what's so fun and so cool to think about, and I can sense your giant, creative, curious brain, is that, things change over time. Demographic shifts, family formation changes, everything like that changes, that affects how we live, affects how we think, and affects what's important to us today. And what's a priority today might not have been a priority 10 years ago. And if we are on top of that and understanding of that, then, we risk being left behind.
For sure. Well, when you're building like on that scale, right, a mass, huge developments, that old thinking of highest and best use certainly drives much of business, right? What makes the most sense for the most people? And when you start to introduce a newer doctrine of, let's dive down a little bit into the behaviors, and there's not the ROI that's clear. Did you have any pushback from anybody you worked with on adapting some of these methods?
Oh, 100% for sure. And certainly every team is different. But the highest and best use fallacy is really that it optimizes for land value, not for human value. So it treats land as a commodity that's producing a short term return over time versus a community that's an ecosystem that really adapts and evolves over time. So a community is never done. It evolves and changes. They're not static. And I think the whole highest and best use thing also, to your point about value, it undervalues experience as an economic driver. So I'll just give you for instance, 76% of people today say they will pay more to live in a walkable community. And
Mm.
homes that are within walking distance of civic spaces like parks, retail, schools, and so on sell for an average 24 to 25% more than other homes that are in a conventional highest and best use. How many things can I cram into this land plan subdivision? So I think it's a throwback to post World War II suburban land planning, where it was a production machine and the car was everything and land was cheap, but it's just not how people want to live today.
Uh, that's for sure. My husband and I sold our house in the suburbs 3 years ago and we moved back to the center city. We got rid of one of our cars. We walk everywhere. We value exactly what you said: convenience, parks, walkability. It makes perfect sense, but it is a shift. It's definitely a mind shift from that car based mentality that, yeah, happened post war, especially in America. We're so in love with our cars, right? We see these changes over time and it takes a while for design to catch up, right? So how do the people that observe life then translate those changes into innovation and new designs and models?
Yeah, I love that question because again, it comes back to in really two simple things. It's pains and gains. So when you're observing life, you can understand what pains your customers are trying to mitigate. Too much time spent in my car, too much time away from my family, the inaffordability of homes, or the ongoing operating costs that are skyrocketing of homes. Those are examples. And what gains they might want to amplify: more personal freedom, more choice, more flexibility, more time to focus on well-being. So those two things, pains and gains, are about value and relevance. And if you understand that, then you can use those as inputs to design a solution and you have a better shot at success. So you never stop observing and understanding the nuance of human behavior. And I think you must always be comfortable looking at the world again, one of these Terryisms, from what I call the outside in, right? If I just look at the world through my lens and what's important to me, I'm not meeting your needs, Lisa. I have to understand you as a human being, right? So I have to look at the world from the outside in and then take those cues and design accordingly.
That's really good, Terry. Well, I appreciated your data on the ROI because obviously any company, any business concern is going to be thinking about that. And there is a translation of it. I mean, it's always been difficult from in the spa world to quantify the benefit of coming to a place and having a massage, right? You feel better, but it's not a visible, measurable component that is difficult to say for the business, okay, this investment was worth it. But I love that you have data that shows that people do want this. Not all people. Some people do still want to get in their car and go to their big garage in the suburbs. But luckily, community is driving this movement towards the walkability and livability, which I think is awesome. So now that we know that people want to have those components, then you shift into creating places that offer these, right? And that, as you said earlier, you're creating communities, not, we're used to in the wellness real estate or regular real estate world, like those big builders nationally that everyone knows the name of, and they build thousands of homes and you always wanted one of those homes. And now it's not about that, right? It's about the experience you have when you're living in it. So how do we shift into that, creating that lived experience for people that want that?
Yeah. I think that's a really great question because, data like from the American Time Youth Study shows that we're spending more time at home today than we ever have before, even post pandemic. And that's
Mhm.
not going down with hybrid living and more people working from home summer all the time. So I think the difference between kind of branding or putting a story on something and creating an actual lived experience is really the difference between one is a bow on a package or a marketing tactic, And the other is a development philosophy that really, as I said earlier, starts with understanding the people who will live there, what they care about, and then designing to ensure that those things are foundational, like infrastructure. So we always talk about roads, water, sewer, electricity. Well, wellness and the things that people care about should be considered infrastructure. And then and only then do you have a shot at activating the story or the brand promise you're making in real and meaningful ways that can literally create that lived experience, designing from the ground up.
Right, because what you're making, different than what we have done in spa and wellness traditionally, you're creating a thing that you can see and sit in and live in, and it has to have the components that people are interested in. The physical design, the flow, the look, um, and the amenities part of it. So, how about the storytelling aspect of it? I mean, what comes in when you're designing homes this way? I mean, do you need to have a storytelling angle to sort of shape the perception of people who maybe don't understand what it is you're creating?
I think more so than ever in every aspect of life, human beings are craving story and what story brings, which is an emotional connection, right? So that's a huge question that really crosses into neuroscience and psychology and marketing and design and everything. But story connects us emotionally. When we empathize with each other and engage in another's point of view, we're paying attention, right? I'm getting to know you today more than I knew you before from sitting on webinars together or being in events with you. So I have a different perspective of Lisa now because you've shared more of your story. We can see ourselves in the story, I think it's more meaningful and it collapses the really horrifying distance between us and others, right? So in community development, we don't lead with facts and figures. I mean, that's the highest and best use model where you say how many acres, how many units, how many things. We lead with the narrative about what life will be like here. So, and then the origin story of the place. Why did we build this? Why did we create it the way that we did? And then, coupled with that, then as people live and it takes shape and it becomes more alive, their stories get created and they share their stories. And then that creates that lived proof or that lived experience you talked about earlier.
So you really need to have your story together. I mean, and we know that from basic marketing, right? The first thing you ask anybody who has a business is, what's your product? What's the story about selling it so that I can engage people and market to those people? But you're marketing a product that they maybe didn't realize that they wanted or needed. I mean, so how do you create that story so that it kind of creeps in on them and that, if that's not what they led with?
Well, I mean, buying a home is the most expensive and emotionally charged purchase anyone will ever make, right? So, I mean, that is, I take I take that very seriously. And I think all the people that I work with do as well, because, you've got to be able to see yourself there. I had a mentor early in my career that when we would talk about creating marketing materials or brochures, his metric for success was he would say to me, TST, if your customer doesn't want to put their foot in your brochure and be part of it, you failed. And he's right, right? So that's the same in creating a story for a community. If somebody can drive into a new home community and it looks like everything else or feels like everything else, then we've failed. But if there's an essence of the place and they can feel themselves being seen and they can see others there, I think then it has just much more of an emotional connection that is more powerful than facts and figures and the rational side of our brain.
Oh, that makes sense. Let's talk, Terry, about that, the wellness as infrastructure piece, the thing that becomes not an amenity, but part that's built in. I remember maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more, I went to a wellness architecture symposium in New York City, put on by Veronica Schreiber Smith, and I didn't know her that well. And I was like, what's wellness architecture? I never even heard of that. And I went to the symposium and I learned all these people had flown in from around the world who made buildings that literally would go back to the earth at the end of their life cycle. They weren't made from bad materials. All the thought that went into design and airflow and light. And I had no idea that this existed. And now, I mean, now it's amazing, right? What's happening, how the space is bursting with innovation and energy. So wellness was this thing that was in the spa or the gym, right? And now it's like, well, you want your home to be that. But how do we do it? What are some of the steps you look at to actually create a wellness environment?
Yeah, I love that question too, because, 85% of our health outcomes are based on our built environment. So where and
Wow,
how we live, I know it's significant.
that's a lot.
CDC research, the GWI research, I mean, that's a stat that's very often quoted, and it makes people sit up and take notice because really it means that only 15% of what happens to your health and well being is genetic. The rest of it's within our own control. So, where and how we live really determines our health outcomes. And I think what it means is we have a responsibility to really look at all the domains of human well being. So everything from social, physical, mental, environmental, economic, civic, and spa and fitness, I think, did a really good job in the early days of thinking about physical well-being and to some extent mental well-being and emotional fitness. But we have to look at it all, right? So real estate is really no longer neutral. And that's what you experience when you experience that first opportunity to talk about it with others. So we ask ourselves things like looking at all of those domains of wellness. How do we solve for that in whatever situation, whether it's a urban mixed use infill community or it's a sizable new master plan or it's a redevelopment opportunity? Are there places for accessible social connection? Is physical activity and mobility encouraged? Is there access to clean water and clean air? Or are we building for cars, right? Are we supporting the local economy or are we extracting local wealth and focusing more on creating parking counts for big box retailers that take their money back to wherever their headquarters are? Is there self-governance? Do the people who live there feel a sense of power in kind of defining their own future? Are there civic spaces like libraries and places that people can foster inclusion and share ideas and gather across different income bands? And, more importantly than ever before, is there housing product and community amenities that support different types of households? We're still building in America today, more than 80% of the homes we build from new construction are 2,500 square feet and up. And only 18% of the US population, 18% is a married couple with 2 kids. So there's a product market mismatch. We're building the wrong product for the people that are the majority of residents in the US today.
That's fascinating. It reminds me, my kids are in their late 20s, say, and I was looking at apartments with one of them, and I love the way they're doing apartments now, especially here in the city right around us, where the apartments aren't bigger, but they have much more social space than they used to. They have co-working spaces, they have saunas, they have gyms, they have dog sitting or whatever. And so it looks like they're built in a way where you don't spend your whole life in your apartment, like in a hotel, right? When we're in a hotel, I'll go down to the lobby and work on my laptop just because I feel silly sitting in my room all the time. And they're building places like that. It seems that apartments have caught on, but I don't see, to your point, the housing stock has changed their models. What should they be building? What do people want today if only 18% are a married couple?
Well, it's funny because in the American Home Study that I co founded during the early days of the pandemic, we've now fielded that survey 4 times over the last 5 years. And one of the questions we ask is around just that. What community amenities would be more likely to impact your desire to choose one community over another? And this last round of our study, third places for, where you can walk to have a coffee or a casual restaurant, ranked number 2 above trails, which I've never seen before, as the most desired amenity. So soft infrastructure is really, really top of mind today. And there's even some more interesting data than just, what people say they want. But again, back to the American Social Capital Survey, if people live closer to spaces that have social infrastructure that's active and engaging, like the sorts of things I just mentioned, they're 3 times more likely to say they have close friends than those who don't.
And is it just a perception or do they have them?
When they're asked the question, 32% of people who live in those types of environments said, I have a number of close friends in my life. 9% of people who didn't said they didn't have said they had close friends in their lives. So it's a big difference.
That is a big difference, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it. You're not meeting people driving around on the highway, right? You're meeting people when you're out and about. You bump into them in a coffee shop. They drop their package and you pick it up, whatever. That is how you connect. So that's what you call soft infrastructure, sort of the things that support it.
That's right. Exactly. Those places where you can have sort of casual connections with people you might not otherwise meet. Yeah, exactly, Lisa.
What about the homes themselves, Terry? Like, what do you have data showing how they should be built differently? Like, you've got the primary suite, the other two small bedrooms, the living room, and the kid. I mean, what does the next model look like?
Yeah, smaller, more flexible homes designed for the 67% of Americans today who are one and two person households. And the younger people who are delaying marriage, sometimes choosing to have fewer children or no children. They don't need the 3 and 2.5, the 3 bed, 2.5 bath, the kind of home you described with the secondary bedrooms, Jack and Jill strip closets, all that. But they do need maybe two spaces where they can do what you just described. You go down in a hotel lobby and do, where can I sit after work that's not my desk to return a few emails? Where can I be together but separate in my home with those I live with? So that, unfortunately, we do spend a lot of time on our screens, but where can I spend time with others, but also have a place to kind of get away on my own in my space? So I think it's really, we talk about thinking about spaces in the home and how people use those spaces and not so much defining rooms in the home. And I think that's really the wave of the future. Smaller, more flexible homes. I mean, our population is in the next 10 years is getting older. It's more ethnically diverse. There'll be smaller family formations. Affordability is going to continue to be an issue. So all these things are really going to drive home design in the future.
Do you think that we're going to see homes built that have sort of two primary suites, given how many people are either living with their adult children or their parents, right? I mean, we see that a lot in other countries. We see it less here, but I'm wondering if design will catch up to that trend.
We're seeing it now, actually, Lisa, in projects I'm working in, even up in Seattle, Washington. We're seeing, the conventional builders that are offering what we call multi-gen options are selling out faster than the traditional home floor plans. So, and it's not just families, but another trend is unrelated adults cohabitating together because of the affordability crisis. Like your children that are in their late 20s, early 30s, 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, they might decide to buy a home as an investment with a friend. And that would require a different floor plan, different housing layout. So multi-generational is a
100%.
big deal. It's huge.
No, I mean, it's so hard for young people to afford something now. I mean, my daughter saves a lot of her money, but it's still a home ownership is very far out of reach for many people. And that sounds like a great trend to help them. So do we have any data on the ROI of all this building yet, other than what you said earlier? I mean, it sells faster, it has a bigger demand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the really seminal source for that is I give credit to the Global Wellness Institute and the recent republication and update of the Build Well to Live Well report. That report has just an absolute treasure trove of metrics from all around the world. But some of the examples that they cite, I just pulled a few kind of salient ones for your listeners. So 78% of people in the U.S. would pay more to live in that walkable community. Their data shows that residential wellness real estate can capture a 10 to 25% price premium on average. And of course, that depends on the market area. Walkability, for every 1 point increase in a walk score, that correlates to a 1% price increase in home value. And new urbanist communities, the sorts of things that we've been talking about with soft infrastructure and mixed use, neighborhood serving services and so on, those can capture up to a 20% premium over conventional residential neighborhoods.
20%. I mean, that's a lot.
It is a lot, and they absorb faster. So back on thinking about the commercial side, commercial buildings, again, the office market is definitely challenged right now as we're not all returning to work in the office in the urban cores. So commercial buildings with green, sustainability, and wellness features are capturing, depending on the market, 5 to 15% more rent. Retention is a lot higher. A CBRE survey of 500 commercial real estate brokers found that 49% would pay a premium for some of those features, and it would improve the physical and mental health of their employees. So the numbers are there, and the build level report is really the seminal source.
I have to look at that. So, what about wellness features, Terry? What are you hearing about? Are people demanding bigger bathrooms, saunas? We're all about cold plunges now. I don't see too many houses with them, but experience showers, multi zone climate control. Like, are elements like that important?
Yeah, I think it depends on the buyer group. And one thing that's important for everybody to remember, unlike 40 or 50 years ago when, the conventional nuclear family was the primary buyer group, this is fascinating. I just learned this data last week from some recent research. No one household formation today makes up more than 30% of the American population. No one household type. So just think about that for a minute. So
That's big fragmentation.
it's very fragmented. And it also means that, we have different levels of ability to afford certain things. We're at different life stages. We're living with different people or not. We're living alone more than ever. Single women is definitely on the rise. So, but what our survey showed, what the American Home Study survey showed was things like whole home air filtration, whole home water filtration, really important. Those were the top two. Energy conservation, the ability to have solar on your roof to store energy storage and battery systems and so on. Things that would do things like improve the quality of your indoor and air environment, but also help you save utility costs were really top of mind. But from a design perspective, to your point about, master bathrooms or primary bathrooms and spa getaways, what we're seeing top of mind for most consumer groups are those spaces to retreat. So, wellness spa, primary baths, whatever that degree of wellness means in that particular price band. Better work from home spaces, more flexible work from home spaces, definitely places to exercise and work out. Even if it's just a little closet where your, exercise bike can be, or you can have a yoga mat that gets rolled out so you can use your app in the morning at 6 a.m., whatever it is. But those sorts of things are really, really top of mind and more important than, a Jack and Jill sink in a secondary bathroom, for example.
Well, it does reflect how society has changed and evolved from that model that you and I probably grew up with. I mean, younger people, the Gen X's, the Gen Ys, the Gen Zs, they do value their health and they put a priority on that. And it's not just lip service, right? They do it. They seek out healthy food and lifestyles in a way that the boomers didn't do.
Right.
The problem is finding a way for them to afford the housing that they want. I mean, those two have to meet at some point.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting insight though, right? So the Gen Z in particular really seems to be valuing experiences over ownership. And it's hard for me to say that when my collaborators and my business is really, working in the new home industry for a lot of it. But we saw a huge increase in just 2 years in the number of people that were looking for and open to a rent to own option, right? So 50% of the respondents to our survey who were renters said, give me a rent to own option. It was 33% just 2 years ago. So I think that's a whole other opportunity that we need to be looking at is different models, rental structures, co-living, cohabitating structures, rent to own models, those sorts of things. I don't think it's necessarily all about having to be tied to that 30-year mortgage. I think there's more options today that we need to be looking at.
For sure. I mean, yeah, I hope people listening can do something about that because it definitely needs updating. So I'd like to hear more about the study that you started, the American at Home study, and what prompted that.
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. So I can tell you the moment. It was March 31st, 2020. My largest client had just phoned me and said, Terry, we're putting all work on hold for at least 4 months because the world's ending. And so I was in my kitchen making lunch and asking myself, wow, this will be interesting. How will I make a living in the next little while?
How will I have lunch?
Right. And then I was frustrated because, my undergrad degree was in communications and sociology, but I did a year of journalism training before that. And so I was listening to the news media and everybody was talking about the impact the pandemic would have on things like small business, airline travel, live sporting events, live music events, hotels, hospitality, spa resorts, all the things that we do in person. And yet, what were we doing? We were all living, working, schooling, doing everything from home. And nobody was asking, how will this impact how we think about our homes and communities?
Smart observation.
Well, that's the reality of it. We are all doing that. So I contacted a research collaborator of mine and an architect collaborator and said, why don't we self-fund this study and ask Americans what this means for how they think about home and community in the future? So we did. And as I said,
What did that look like? Like, how did you get your lists and how do you build that?
So we crafted the survey tool. We sat and we worked together and said, what are the things we want to know most about how people care and think about their homes and then their communities, because I think both are important and they're different. So we crafted the survey tool. We went out and found a third-party objective research provider called Gazelle Global based in New York City that actually fielded the tool for us. We said, here's the criteria. So the screening criteria, we wanted to make sure we were talking to American adults that were, I think it was 25 to 74 years of age with a household income 50,000 or above, and that, we're in the market for a home in the next few years, or we're renters. And we had a certain threshold we wanted to meet across each of those different groups. So our data tied to the US Census, so it was, scientifically sound. We ran the first study. We ran the study again in October of 2020, naively thinking it would be the pre and post study, but we were still locked down, of course. Yeah. And then wave 3 was in 2022 and wave 4 was last year, not quite a year ago now. And at the end of wave 2 and the end of wave 4, we took the research, not just in terms of something that would sit on a shelf, but we designed and built 2 concept homes. And one of them's in your backyard. So we in Pittsburgh. So we designed and built a concept home in suburban Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, in an area called Chatham Park with Garmin Homes in 2021. We're still in the middle of just coming out of COVID. And so that entire floor plan was designed out of the insights of our survey. And then we designed and built a second concept home that was a volumetric factory built home. Installed on a infill lot in Pittsburgh, and it actually has a 2,000 square foot townhouse and a 600 square foot ADU on the main floor. So both of those homes were award winners. They both won national design competitions. They were featured in Fast Company, USA Today. I mean, it's a lot of great media coverage around some of the design changes and floor plan shifts that we made as a result of the direct consumer insights that people said they cared about.
How smart that was of you to jump on that opportunity. And it sounds like you had a good team. How many thousands of responses did you get?
We have a total of almost 15,000 responses now. It was 3,000 across the first 3 waves and a little over 6,000, 3,000, 4,000, a little over 6,000 in wave 4.
So what surprised you the most about the results you obtained?
Yeah, there's sort of 5 key areas or 5 key things. One, Lisa, is that the shifts that began during the pandemic have proved to be lasting. And again, I naively, that sociologist in me, naively thought we're at this point in time. We're going to pop out of the end of this point in time and things will go back to...
We all thought that. Yeah.
But it hasn't happened. So online shopping has continued. Hybrid work has continued. All those things. So the shifts have been lasting. The work from home thing surprised me. We heard a big run up about a year and a half ago that return to office mandates, even from some big tech companies, but it's just not proving out to be the case. So, 30% of those who can, and not everyone's job allows it, but those who can work from home all the time. 20% more work from home some or part of the time. The third thing that surprised me was that the shifts in our behavior, we asked a lot of questions about what are you doing more of or less of today as a result of this time in our lives. 32% of us are still cooking and eating together and baking together more at home than we were 2 years ago.
Well, that's a good thing then.
It is. And then I think number 4 directly relates to wellness is that I was absolutely shocked, and I continue to be, around the gap in satisfaction between how important Americans think certain areas of wellness are in their lives and then how satisfied they are. So we asked the question, we said, so take all these domains of wellness. How important is financial wellness to you? And then how satisfied are you with your own financial wellness? So I'll take that one as a start. So there's a 41% gap in level of importance and satisfaction for financial well-being. Not a huge surprise given the economy that we're in right now,
Mhm.
But it gets worse. There's a 34% gap in terms of physical well being. We just came out of a global health pandemic. And there's a 34% gap between importance and satisfaction, a 22% gap in terms of emotional wellness. So I step back and go, wow, if that isn't the recipe for how we should be creating homes and communities and places that better support health and wellness, I don't know what is. And then I think the fifth and sort of biggest insight for me is really the trade offs that people are willing to make to be better positioned to become home buyers. Again, those have continued. So smaller homes, smaller yards, smaller or no garages. And then, as I said earlier, really looking at different models of ownership that might be more open today than they would have been 3 or 4 years ago.
Fascinating insights. I'm just so impressed that you got it together and you made it happen so quickly. And then you got homes built on it. Tell us how that happened. Who funded that? How did that come to be?
Well, I mean, my two research partners, Belinda Sward is the research partner, and then Nancy Keenan from Dahlin Architecture and Planning is the architect collaborator. And Nancy gets credit really for saying, Belinda and I said, we don't want this just to be a study that sits on the shelf. There's enough studies out there that sit on the shelf.
Mhm.
And so Nancy said, well, why don't we put the D in R&D and let's actually design and construct homes? And there were a lot of other firms at the time that were designing virtual concept homes and giving you like virtual 3D walkthroughs. We wanted to actually build a home and work on what that meant and how that could happen. So I called another collaborator and dear friends of mine at Garmin Homes, Elena Money Garmin and Jim Garmin in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, and said, how might we? What if we gave you insights from the study and we sat on design sessions? We were all remote. Nobody was working together in person. So we did all of this via Zoom, hours and hours and hours of like design charrettes over Zoom, architects with floor plans and
Amazing.
moving the kitchen and circling things in red. And so we designed the home virtually. And then Garmin actually had a lot in a master plan community called Chatham Park. They went out to their trade partners in the middle of the supply chain crisis in COVID and said, we're building a home in 90 days. Can you supply all these things for me? And every one of them said yes. And Garmin built the home in 90 days, had it open, and it's just been a raging success.
So they build the model and then people say, I want this, and they build more of them.
They did. They built the model. They ultimately sold that home. It was called the Barnaby home after my standard poodle at the time, who sadly passed away during COVID. He had a red collar and he was a blue-gray color. So the exterior of the house was blue-gray and the front door was red. So the
Oh,
Barnaby plan sold. It was the highest priced home in that particular community floor plan at the time. And then they were able to take that plan because it was so successful and continue to offer it in their future plan lineups within that community.
well, kudos not just to you, but to them for getting this done so quickly.
Yeah, Elena and Jim and Rebecca, the whole team at Garmin deserves huge credit. It was a really quite a colossal undertaking. And Elena blogged about it, wrote about it, shot video every time through every stage of construction and shared openly and candidly the choke points that she faced as the builder during the global pandemic and the supply chain crisis. And then the concept home that's in your backyard is called the Picket Fence. And that was built in a factory. That was the result of another collaborator of mine, Dennis Steigerwald, who's the president of the Housing Innovation Alliance, seeing what happened with the Garmin home and saying, hey, Terry, if you do this again in the next wave of the study, what if we were to build a home in a factory setting and create a digital twin and control the entire process and then set 3 very specific sustainability goals that we could measure during that process? So we did that as a result as well.
So, what is the difference between what you just described and what you did with Garmin?
So Garmin's home was stick built on the actual site. So like most conventional housing in America today is built, foundation is set, framers come in and build the home. The home with the picket fence home was designed and a digital twin was created. And then the architect worked with the engineers in an actual offsite factory. And the home was constructed on a factory line in 3 modules placed on it. I mean, all the plumbing was installed, the, interior, all the walls, obviously, the fixtures, a lot of built-in cabinetry, kitchen counters, appliances were installed in the factory. Then those 3 modules were loaded on trucks, driven to the actual infill site in Pittsburgh. And then they were craned up and assembled together and then all tied together. And then the site was finished on site.
what's the financial benefit of building that way? Does it cost more or less?
Ultimately, it should cost less because you have a repeatable process. So you
Mhm.
design a plan, you can scale that plan, you can evolve things in the factory, but you can control timing, you can control weather, you can control when the sub trades and trades come into the factory to complete things. You don't have weather delays, you don't have people,
Mhm.
getting out of step in terms of the construction and design process or the design and construction process. So yeah, I mean, ultimately it should be cheaper. This was a concept home, so it's like a concept car. The first one's
Sure.
never going to be the cheapest one. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Do you think that developers are still getting some things wrong post COVID, or have they? Yes, she's nodding. Yes.
This is an interesting question and it's a challenging one to answer because I don't think that if this is blame to be had, that it falls solely on the shoulders of our development industry. I think that in North America, our jurisdictions, meaning the cities and counties that approve what can get built, are operating with outdated zoning models. And in many cases,
Mm.
all the things that we just talked about wanting, which, we call missing middle housing or new urbanist design, in many jurisdictions, that's illegal to build because they want wider streets and more parking and bigger setbacks. So the jurisdictions are really prohibiting the developers from building what people want. But I do think that our development industry and my best friends and colleagues are in that industry. We all need to get better at looking at what people want, not just responding to what the jurisdictions will approve and what the builders say is the lowest, easiest path to less resistance to actually put on the ground. So I think, we've become hesitant to create new products because it's a very financially intense industry. There's a lot of hundreds of millions of dollars up front get spent before the first home gets sold. So I think it's a situation that's a systemic problem that we really need to change. Um, but I do believe that, based on our research and the work I do every day, that the consumer shifts that we're seeing are lasting. Largely because they're not driven by trends, Lisa, but they're driven by demographics, and demographics are destiny, right? So I feel like if we don't figure this out and we don't catch up, and some jurisdictions have changed, and some development companies have won positive zoning shifts and so on, I think that new housing will continue to be unaffordable, and it'll be a seismic issue for the industry.
That's a really great observation, Terry. I mean, maybe it's not forever, any shift, right? But when you think about how the housing model changed in America, at least post World War II, I mean, even though it's changing now, that was 70 years ago. I mean, that's a long time. It's, more than the lifetime of some of the houses that we built. So there's no reason to think that we won't get 70 years out of this model, depending on how things go. So let's talk future, community, wellness, culture. How are those going to be factors in shaping future development?
Yeah, I think that we need to move from thinking related to your earlier questions from building, then spaces, then life. We need to flip the order and
Mm.
think about life, then spaces, and then buildings.
Mm.
So I don't think culture is the outcome of a great project. I think culture is the input. And I think that everything we do should start with understanding the culture of that place and the people who will one day live and work and play there. And, just like I said earlier, there's really no one size fits all, right? So one product type doesn't fit all lifestyles. And we're going to need to get better at creating places where people can live life in ways that matter to them. So whatever their cultural background or understandings are, and belonging is really an interesting part of your question because, I'm in the camp personally that I think we're craving opportunities to connect with each other, to see and to be seen. And I think there's more influence than ever on things that are local, handmade, craft made, incremental, relevant. And there's a bit of a blowback and a pushback from as everything kind of combines and merges together from all the nameless, faceless, big, corporate stuff. So again, that's my personal camp, but I really think that it's really life, spaces, buildings, not buildings, spaces, life.
That's a great observation. And you're right. People do want, we've lost a sense of identity, I think, because the speed of everything, the ability to have everything at your fingertips. I was thinking about this the other day, like how when we were young and we went to an office and you met at the water cooler, you talked about a TV show that was on last night and you had all watched it because there was only three channels to watch things on. And now, we have all this choice and yet it makes us more fragmented than ever. And so I do appreciate the younger generations who are wanting to buy local and build that community because they have lost their sense of place, I think, and just because of the speed at which we've developed.
Yeah, totally agree completely.
So now we have the opportunity to, starting with culture, brilliant, to make lives the way that we want them. Is there opportunity in there for collaboration between, say, people listening to this podcast might be in hospitality and some might be in wellness and some in wellness real estate? I mean, how can we all work together?
Yeah, I think so for sure. I think the answer to that is just a resounding yes. I mean, there are so many smart people in all different industries and it really takes a multidisciplinary approach to bring a place to life for people because we are complex, complicated, imperfect beings. So, somebody that has a background in the hospitality industry will have a much better understanding than I will, possibly in the areas of how we can provide better customer service or better ways to listen to what people care about. So those are really critical things. I talked about my friend Dennis. I mean, he is really completely committed to, new product technologies, new product manufacturers, use of materials, different ways of using resources. He's taught me so much that I wouldn't have ever known before, that I think really makes us all better and stronger together for sure.
So we just need to find like-minded people and try and work together.
Or even people who aren't like minded who can bring friction because out of friction can also come new ideas. I think we
That's
need to
true.
find, right, people who are maybe open to being part of a solution, and bringing those ideas together. One of the things I got to do at Newland, which was so fun and a really memorable part of my career there, was work with the human factors design team at IDEO, which is up in the Bay Area. They're the group that
Mhm.
invented, the Apple mouse,
Remember.
right?
Mhm.
And so we posed one simple question to them and said, this was way back in 2014 in the early days of the internet. And we said, well, now that the web is a big thing, do we even need welcome centers anymore? And that was it. We said, you tell us, you go and figure out your research methodology and you tell us the answer. And we were wide open. And so we got to experience firsthand how they went out and did ethnographic interviews with people, shop alongs, ride alongs. They went back to people's homes, looked in their fridge, watched how they lived to understand what people wanted from these spaces and how these spaces needed to evolve and change over time as we're doing more things online. So that's an example of we would never have come up with the solution we ultimately did if we just started with what we already knew.
Sure, you're right. I mean, innovation is sparked by differences in opinions sometimes. So, what was the solution you came up with based on that?
So we were the first developer at the time back in the day. Now it's common table stakes, doesn't even sound like an innovation anymore, but was really that the welcome center needs to feel like not a sales environment. It needs to feel like a neutral third space where people can come and see what this place is really about and feel like, do I want to live here? Close their eyes and see themselves waking up in the morning there, think about where their children might go for their swim meets. And so we created a little cafe experience. It wasn't a home with a flag on it that screamed, I'm a welcome center. It was a third place that was a multi-use space within the fabric of the community design itself.
Mm.
And now you're seeing people do things like Two Step Farms in Texas has created a dance hall and a farm market. You're seeing the examples of those third spaces happening everywhere that are really coming out of the fabric of the individual communities, which is so rewarding.
That's fascinating. And it sort of reflects how the people live in that area. I'm thinking of I have relatives in Italy, in Umbria, and they live modestly in homes. Some of them live in buildings that house multiple apartments, and different members of the family are in the same apartment. But across the street, they built a little building for eating together, and it has a kitchen and then a big room and a little patio, a loggia at the end. And when it's like Easter dinner or Christmas dinner and you've got 20, 30 people nobody's kitchen is big enough for that. So they go over there. And I thought, wow, I mean, you don't see that in other countries, but of course, Italy is all about food. And they found a way, to make that easy and convenient that fit in with their lives. So again, just innovation when you think about what solves a problem. So, Terry, in closing, I would like to ask you, with all your vast knowledge, what gives you optimism about the future of how we're living?
Yeah, I think for me, I have to believe in the resilience and the creativity of the human spirit. I mean, we've been through a lot of tough times before, a lot of, very fast innovation. Now, when people smarter than me argue that the pace of change and the innovation we're experiencing now is like never before. But I think the resilience and creativity of the human spirit really gives me hope and a belief that I think more than ever, more people understand the lasting impacts that where and how they live have on their well being. And I think they're increasingly seeking out places that support that. I think we're seeing people no longer willing to just cram themselves into a home. They're making different choices. They have different value equations. And to me, that's exciting because I think when the consumer has different needs and wants to change, then the industry needs to follow.
Well put. I have a question you may not have an answer for, although you've had an answer for everything. I mean, if we evolve in our models into these new platforms and designs you were discussing, what happens to the housing stock we've already got, which is so much in the old style?
Well, that is a huge question, and a lot of people are talking about it. I mean, there's a couple things. First of all, the equity unlock, like a lot of boomers and older Gen X are in these larger homes that don't work for some of the younger family formation household types. A lot of the Gen X group are trapped in mortgages that are not trapped. They're enjoying mortgages that are 2.5% and 3% and reticent to move. So I mean, I think there's a potential that we can go back to the way that we used to live, where, there was a house that could be subdivided into multiple homes. Like I lived in a house in Ottawa when I went to my, first year of university at Carleton. It was an old home in an area called the Glebe. And it would have been an old stately colonial home, but it was divided into 5 one-room apartments. And we all shared a communal kitchen. My aunt, when she was, getting on in age and sold her family home, moved into a similar home like that in Regina, Saskatchewan, up in Canada as well, where it was a home that was converted into a kind of an independent living facility with a communal kitchen and food service, but they each had their own rooms. So I think there's going to be some redevelopment that will have to happen. And I think, it remains to be seen beyond that how we solve this, but it's definitely going to be an issue in the next 10 to 20 years.
Well, there's an opportunity for builders out there and construction trades to do some refits. Terry, can you give us a brief snapshot of what you think will be happening at the Wellness Real Estate Symposium? What kind of topics will be on the menu?
Yeah, I think the team has put together a great group of speakers from different parts of the world, lots of different countries, lots of different disciplines. I think there seems to be a real focus on I think both neuroscience and the arts and the impact that sort of mental and social wellness in place has on our brains and how we think. There's some conversations around new styles of design. Joseph Allen, again from Harvard, will be there and talking about, indoor air quality. Dennis from the Housing Innovation Alliance will be talking about the Housing Innovation Challenge, which is a group of universities that have student teams together to solve the housing challenge of the future, to create new innovative housing types that create better environments for living. I think there's going to be some really exciting global projects that are probably on the maybe upper end, luxury scale or more discretionary ends. And I think that we're continuing to foster the conversation around democratizing wellness and creating well places for all. So I think it'll be exciting. I always leave those sessions motivated. And I think if you leave with 5 things that you can take away and 3 questions to ask, it's been a good session.
For sure. And I'm sure there will be no doubt that will be happening. I can't wait to hear all these speakers, and yourself included. Thank you so much for your time today, Terry Slavik-Suki, Principals and Storyteller of TST Inc., and incredible knowledge on wellness and housing. It's been very enlightening speaking with you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa, for your very thoughtful conversation, and I appreciated the opportunity.
Great. Well, I'll see you soon in New York.
Indeed.